The screen is being shared by John Baumgardner. And I guess if Ray was going to make the introduction.
Yep, I will introduce John. And by the way, discussing what he's going to do, we decided there's so much there that he can share. In fact, he can do an entire creation seminar if we needed him. But he's got enough there to do 2 sessions. So we'll do this morning and then next week. So I'll do a little perhaps better introduction than what I might have just to save his time there. But anyway, he's got a master's degree in double engineering. I don't know if Charlie's here, but one of his degrees is from Texas Tech. I know Charlie spent some time there. He's got a PhD. Well, he met the Lord somewhere in there. I think you were at graduate school. Is that correct, John?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, he became a believer, and in the process of learning scripture and growing up there, he felt a move of the Lord to get into creation science. So he went on to get a master's and a PhD in another area, geophysics primarily, mainly to do some flood, what is commonly being referred to now as flood geology. So what he will do is present basically the flood model that has become in the creation science world pretty much the standard these days. So he's got a geophysics PhD. He's worked for Rockwell. I got to know him while he was at Los Alamos National Lab. So he lived in New Mexico for 20 years, I believe. And you retired from there, right? Is that correct?
Yes, I retired in 2004 from Los Alamos.
I have a quick question. Hey, John and Ray, it's not exactly on topic, but it kind of is. I just want to get your expertise on something. As you know, I'm writing a book on the attributes of God, and one of the attributes of God, of course, is that he is a spirit, which means he's not made up of matter. But if you take the special and general relativity theories of Einstein, because of the relationship of matter to energy and time to space, we would have to say that God is outside of time and space. Therefore, time does not touch him. He's outside of time. He can't be procreated as any kind of energy, etc. The only thing that gives me the willies a little bit is I know just enough about the general and special relativity theories to be dangerous. And I don't know if there's any traps there for creationists, if you know what I'm saying. In other words, oh no, creationists never want to use that argument because blah, blah, blah. Is there any reason why I should stay away from these theories when I discuss God as spirit?
What argument are you?
I would, my own advice is that there is, I actually have a paper on this. There is a powerful example that non-material reality is, we participate in it all the time. So we've been deeply influenced by a materialist outlook, materialist philosophy, that the only reality is material reality. Well, it's easy to falsify that claim with a counterexample of an important dimension, an important type of reality that can be demonstrated to be completely non-material. And I have a couple of papers on that. That example is language, which basically has to do, what language is encoded meaning, and meaning is non-material. But language plays a huge role in our world. It's of course important in the human experience, our thinking, our logic, our involves in language. Our communication with one another involves language. All our computer software is language, mathematics is language, the DNA code is language. Life is, is a critical, probably the most critical component to living systems is all the specifications that allow these systems to come into being and to operate. So language plays a crucial role in living systems. And the fact that the laws of physics are mathematical in nature, and mathematics is language, means that the physical universe has a linguistic underpinning. So, and certainly the Bible reveals God as a God who speaks, and that he spoke forth and the universe came into being. So there's the idea, or the revelation that God's speaking brings about profound consequences. So
John, is there a way to get these papers? Where are these? Are they published, or how do I get them?
They can be downloaded from my website, globalflood.org, and you search around for a tab that is called linguistics on that website.
What's the name of that website again, would you please?
It's globalflood, all one word, .org. The second paper is probably easier to follow. It was published in a theological journal, the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society, in 2015.
Okay, back to the introduction. After he retired from Los Alamos, he went to work for ICR as an adjunct professor and was involved in probably the most, you might even tell him a little bit about this, John, but the probably the most significant research project that Christians have ever endeavored, multi-million-dollar research project. I guess I would summarize it as dealing with a lot of the issues, not only Genesis flood, but primarily with the issue of time and that sort of thing.
The title of the name of the project that we adopted was Radioisotopes in the Age of the Earth. And it actually started while I was still at Los Alamos. In fact, most of that project, all but the last year, was unfolded while I was at Los Alamos.
Okay.
And so there were 7 PhDs, and the basic result was God gave us multiple independent lines of radioisotope evidence that the Earth is young, thousands, not billions of years old. So pretty significant research undertaking.
Yes, and I'm going to go over a little of that when we talk about the age of the Earth. So some of that will come up. And I guess presently you're with Liberty University. Is that correct?
Very recently, just in the last few months, I've become a emeritus professor at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia.
A couple of other items. He was, when he was in New Mexico, he was one of the founding members of the Creation Science Fellowship of New Mexico. That's about it. So I'll just turn it over to John and go ahead and do what you had planned, and the meeting will be in your hands.
Okay, thank you very much, Ray. I'll ask about questions. I'm open to taking questions during the talk, but I've got a lot of material, so let's try to keep the questions very specific and as brief as possible. But I want to be responsive if somebody has an issue that needs clarification. Please ask your question. So let's start. Why do most educated people today regard the flood merely as a naive myth instead of as an actual part of Earth history? Especially because the flood was regarded as genuine history throughout the Western world up until about 250 years ago. What has happened to change that? Well, the short answer was that it was the atheist intellectual movement of the 1700s known as the Enlightenment. And an example, a key person, is part of the Scottish Enlightenment, James Hutton. He's now regarded as the founder of modern geology, and the reason is that he introduced the ideas of uniformitarianism and deep time in his book Theory of the Earth, published in 1795. And Hutton's famous quote from that book, "No vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end." That was in the context of looking at the rock record, and what his interpretation was that if we look at present day processes, it's very hard to even find when that started. It looks like that had gone on for immense span of time, and because of his materialist outlook, with no agency outside the universe to operate on it, to change things, he felt like there was no prospect of an end. The natural laws that govern the material universe, he believed were unchanging, and therefore there's no reason to expect these processes not to continue into the indefinite future. Okay, the year that Hutton died, 1797, was when Charles Lyell was born, also in Scotland. He's considered the father of modern geology. He's famous for his book Principles of Geology, first published in 1830, but updated in 11 subsequent editions. Lyell was knighted, and because for all his accomplishments, he was buried in Westminster Abbey. He's basically the first several generations of geologists throughout the world were trained using his book. Lyell was zealous in his advocacy of uniformitarianism, summarized in the slogan, "The present is the key to the past." So he, as much as probably more than any one individual, is responsible for spreading this outlook of deep time, Earth being immensely old, and the geological record spanning millions, if not billions of years, spreading that throughout the intellectual world in the 1800s. Now, Darwin took a copy of Lyell's book on his 5-year trip around the world on the Beagle. And after he came back, he became good friends with Lyell. So they had lots of interaction. And the concepts advanced in Lyell's book were foundational to Darwin's speculations on how life might possibly have arisen with no action on God's part. And so Darwinian evolution, in my view, is simply a logical extension of geological uniformitarianism to the realm of biology. And so it's this idea that the Earth is immensely old, that it's the present geological processes we observe are a reliable key to the past, is has made a profound impact on the world we're in today. All right, but all of this was prophesied, was predicted almost 2,000 years ago by the Apostle Peter in 2 Peter 3. Some of Peter's final words that we have. Peter says, "Know this first of all, that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lusts and saying, where is the promise of his coming?" Christ's coming. "For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation." He continues, verse 5, "For they are willfully ignorant of this fact, that by the word of God the heavens existed long ago, and the earth was formed out of water and by water, through which water the world at that time was destroyed, being flooded with water." So that might sound a little bit vague, but I believe I believe this is the leading deception of the last days. Most pastors, preachers are unaware, don't give any heed to this passage, but I believe it is the main deception. It is what has destroyed biblical authority over the last 200 years in the world. And but here in this passage, Peter is predicting that scoffers, that is atheists who reject the very concept of God, will also reject the claim that Jesus will return with the excuse that all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation. In effect, they'll be saying, because there have been no interventions by God in the past in the physical world, what reason is there to expect any in the future? Peter continues this logic by pointing out that actually there have been major interventions by God too, in fact, that he mentions in the past. One, his creation of the heavens and the earth, and later his destruction by means of the flood of a world filled with violence and evil. Peter points out that these scoffers will willfully ignore these two major events in the actual history of the world. The view that all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation today is known as uniformitarianism. It is the proposition that the world's physical history can be correctly reconstructed by extending presently observed physical processes operating at approximately presently observed rates into the indefinite past. More briefly, it's the claim that the present is the key to the past. So I have here just some castles representing strongholds raised up against the knowledge of God. 2 Corinthians 10:5 talks about that part of the responsibility of Christians, especially pastors and teachers and Christian leaders, is to be pulling down these strongholds that have been raised up against the knowledge of God. I've shown 5 prominent ones here. And right in the center is this uniformitarian geology. But basically undergirding that is materialist philosophy, which rejects anything that's not material. Darwinian evolution, as I say, is basically a corollary of uniformitarian geology. Big Bang cosmology is an extension of this thinking to the stars and galaxies. And radioisotope dating methods is what has basically ended the debate in the intellectual world on this topic. It's believed that radioisotope dating has settled the question of uniformitarianism, and it's no longer even a topic to be discussed. So these are some of the strongholds that have been raised up, and that we as Christians, and especially as people defending the faith, need to be aware of and need to be prepared to pull down and engaged in pulling them down. But despite the scoffing by the skeptics during the past 220 years or so, the Bible itself allows no room for uncertainty that a global world-destroying flood cataclysm truly occurred. Genesis 6 makes that clear. It says, now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of the human race. And behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth. Behold, even I, am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life from under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall perish. So he gives Noah instructions for building an ark to save his family and representatives of the land-dwelling, air-breathing life. And then verse 11, chapter 7, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So the Bible text is emphatic and clear that this judgment in the flood was global, one that destroyed all the air-breathing, land-dwelling life on earth, apart from the animals and humans that were saved inside the ark. That's clear, very clear from Genesis 7, verse 19. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. Verse 21, all flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all mankind. Of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth. And only Noah was left, together with those that were with him in the ark. And the water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So if that language is taken at face value at all, it's speaking of a global cataclysm that wiped out all the land-dwelling, air-breathing life on the planet. So just sort of a parenthesis here, a key issue for our day, I would say, especially speaking to pastors here, does God actually judge the wicked? We do not hear that message being communicated to any great degree in our day, that God really truly does judge the wicked. The flood reveals with no room for uncertainty that the answer to this crucial spiritual and moral question is an unqualified yes. God does express his wrath against sin and evil, even to the point of destroying billions of people at a single stroke. So I believe, even though we're called to be preaching the cross, preaching Christ crucified, preaching his payment for sin, I believe that in our day, given the circumstances, we also need to be preaching the flood, and that God there's a limit to God's patience, and that if wickedness continues to increase, the certainty of God's wrath is there. God's wrath is certain to be poured out. And looking at the prophetic scriptures, we know that that the scripture teaches that. So there's, we can be so focused on preaching the grace of God, the forgiveness of God, the pardon for sin, that we can omit the other part, a major other part of the message, that we are vulnerable to the wrath of God. It's only because of what Jesus did that we can escape this kind of wrath on God's part. Okay, getting back to the flood. A cataclysm of the scope and intensity as described in Genesis 7 logically must have left an abundance of physical evidence. Wouldn't you think so? Taking those words at face value, there must have been an abundant amount of physical evidence that resulted from that type of cataclysm. So a question: what sort of physical evidence ought an event as described in Genesis 7 have left behind? Well, what about this statement, billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth? That's a famous quote by Ken Ham. Well, I say, well, what do we find when we examine the rock record? What do we actually observe? Well, I would say very obviously, we observe billions of dead things buried in sediment layers all over the earth. A prominent aspect of the sediment record on the earth are these buried dead things, fossils. And just how much of this sort of evidence is there? Well, there's more than a mile, estimated to be about 6,000 feet on average of fossil-bearing sediment blanketing today's continents. It's not uniformly distributed. It's not 6,000 feet everywhere. There's many places where there's zero thickness. It's bare crystal and rock at the surface. In other places, there's 2 or 3 or 4 times this amount of 6,000 feet of fossil-bearing sediment, but on average, there's more than a mile, just a staggering amount of fossil-bearing sediment. Now, so why are fossils so significant in this discussion? And we find all kinds of fossils, things that no longer live on the earth, like this plesiosaur, marine reptile, or these pterosaurs, that flying reptiles. These actually were found in Texas. This particular species had a wingspan of about 36 feet or 11 meters. Just incredible kinds of animals we find in the rock record. Well, fossils are so significant because to be transformed into a fossil, an organism requires rapid and complete burial. Otherwise, predators and bacteria rapidly destroy the organism, and to such a degree that there's no remains preserved. So fossils testify powerfully to catastrophic conditions. So that's why these fossils are so significant. They testify to extreme, catastrophic, unusual conditions. And the fact that the fossils are so common throughout the Cambrian to Cenozoic sediment record argues that this entire record is the product of catastrophic conditions on a global scale. And I'm going to argue that it's a record of a single cataclysm. The fossilized plants also testify to this same global scale catastrophism. Just one example, the Powder River Basin coal formation in northern Wyoming, southern Montana, provides about 40% of all the coal used in the United States. This one deposit is in some places 100 feet in thickness. It's a very high quality, low sulfur coal, and much of it is exported outside the U.S. Here's a shot of it where it's 90 feet thick. This coal can easily be shown to be composed of water transported plant debris, mostly trees that grew elsewhere and were rafted into this location and buried. So even apart from their fossils, these layers, these sediment layers themselves testify to conditions radically different from those operating in our world today. The rock layers are commonly horizontally extensive for hundreds to thousands of miles in both directions. This implies water processes of vast horizontal scale, even global scale. Some of these layers are global in extent, not just in North America, not just in the southwestern portion of North America where this particular cross-section applies. This is a cross-section north-south across the Grand Canyon north up into Utah, extending up into the Bryce Canyon area. But you can see this layer cake pattern of layers. And I'm going to show that this is radically different from what is occurring on the Earth today, the sedimentation pattern. Okay, so the emphasis here is the large horizontal scale of the layers, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles. Most of these layers you see shown here are hundreds of thousands of square miles in lateral extent. And this record also commonly displays flat boundaries between successive layers with little or no erosional channeling across these boundaries. And that's in stark contrast with the Earth's surface today. And we see some of the surface today represented in this slide in the Grand Canyon, Zion Canyon, Bryce Canyon. We see how channelized the surface is in these canyons today. So the Earth's surface today is heavily channelized but we do not see that same kind of character, those same kind of erosional channels in these horizontal sediments. Radically different type of pattern. So the implications of this are huge. It means that vast portions of the continental surface were covered by water when these deposits were formed, that the depositional surfaces were generally smooth, and that deposition was relatively uniform over vast horizontal scales, radically different from today. A vivid contrast with today's world as far as the sedimentation patterns. Today, the typical drainage pattern on the continents has this dendritic character, branching character, like branches on a tree or the roots of a tree. The higher topography is dissected by erosional channels, and the sedimentation is localized to stream and river valleys. So when we look at the record, we do not see this kind of pattern. We see something dramatically different. Now the flatness of these boundaries is nicely illustrated by the contact between the Coconino Sandstone in the Grand Canyon and the Hermit Shale just below. That boundary is marked by this black arrow. Now, this is actual photograph of that boundary, knife edge sharp contact between the Coconino Sandstone, which lies above the contact with the Hermit Shale below. It's along the Bright Angel Trail, just down from Grand Canyon Village on the south rim. Millions of visitors to Grand Canyon hike that trail every year. It's readily visible. Anybody can visit this particular location. You just see how sharp the contact is, and it basically indicates that there was no lapse of time between the deposition of the Hermit Shale and then the sudden change in current direction, different source area, bringing in the sand for the Coconino Sandstone. And so another aspect of the record that indicates catastrophic conditions are what are known as cross beds, giant dune-like structure within these layers. And this cross bedding is a strong indicator of high energy, high velocity water being involved in the transport and deposition of the sediment. And a good example of cross bedding is in the Navajo Sandstone. This is shows cliffs, a canyon cut through the Navajo Sandstone in Zion National Park. These 2,300 foot high cliffs represent the exposed edge of a gigantic sheet of sand, the Navajo Sandstone, that stretched originally from Southern California up into central Wyoming and from Idaho to New Mexico. Its volume is sufficient to bury the entire state of Texas to a depth of 285 feet. So, so this characteristic of this Navajo Sandstone are these very prominent, very visible cross beds, dune structures formed by rapidly moving water. But the depth of the water and the velocity of the water is revealed in the scale of these cross beds. Some of them approaching 100 feet tall, a given set of them, which means the water depth was at least that had to be deeper than that. And so it's revealing catastrophism on a scale beyond the human mind to imagine. And this layer of cross-bedded sand stretching over that vast area, several 100,000 square miles in lateral extent. Another telling factor is major global scale erosional boundaries called unconformities that divide the total fossil bearing record into a few large packages of sediment called megasequences. There was a geologist in the 1960s, Larry Sloss.
John, let me interrupt you for a minute. It seems like somebody's got their mic open, maybe somebody on a phone, because we're getting a little bit of feedback. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
All right. So this is another feature of the record that is indicates some very unusual conditions, catastrophic conditions. And what is meant by this mega sequence is a set of smaller sequences of sediment that are separated by continent-wide or even global erosional boundaries. And I'll show some pictures of this bottommost erosional boundary in a moment. But these six mega sequences are separated from one another in the continental geology by global scale erosional boundaries. And I have to explain this slide a little more. At the top, you see the words continent margin is on the right-hand side, and the continental center is on the left-hand side. And then you see areas that are green and areas that are yellow. Areas that are green represent where there are sediment deposits. So you say these mega sequences are thick and almost continuous at the continent boundaries, whereas most of them taper out, in some cases to almost nothing, at the center of the continent. So it appears that the process responsible was a large up and down fluctuation of the global sea level. And when the sea level was high, you have deposition. When it was low, you have stripping away of sediment and erosion off the continents. And that there were 6 major cycles of this. So this is another thing that flood geology needs to account for. But let's just look at the intensity of these of what was going on. And I'll say by implication that since this is a global scale phenomenon, you need global scale physical processes almost certainly involving the Earth's interior to produce these large scale features. Now, the bottommost unconformity marks the sudden first appearance of fossils in the multicellular life in the rock record. And since fossils are a trustworthy indicator of the flood, this boundary logically must mark the onset of the flood. So we're talking about this discontinuity, erosional unconformity, marked by the red arrow here. And it's at this boundary, above the boundary, there's a sudden appearance of multicellular life. I'll mention that almost most of the major animal phyla suddenly appear from nowhere just above this boundary. Okay, and that unconformity marking the onset of the flood is known as the Great Unconformity. And the level of violence displayed at this point in the record is difficult for the human mind to imagine, to even have anything to connect it to. This is the Great Unconformity exposure of it in central Wisconsin. And the boulder I have my hands on rests right on top of that unconformity, of that boundary. It's a huge block of what is known as Baraboo quartzite. And they rest right above this massive Baraboo formation, quartzite formation. So this cataclysm had the intensity to be able to rip away boulders of this size from this underlying solid rock formation and transport them some distance and deposit them as a layer of boulders. This is a shot right nearby where that previous slide was taken. You can see some of these large boulders on top of this boundary, this unconformity. So that gives you a little flavor for the kind of intensity that was unleashed at the beginning of this cataclysm. And you have six other major unconformities like that through the sediment record. And in general, you have a layer of coarse material just above these other unconformities as well. This great unconformity is very evident in the southwestern U.S. It's well exposed in the Grand Canyon. And this is a cross section, like I showed earlier, a different depiction of it, but the same area of a north-south cross section going from central or northern Arizona up into central Utah. And you see this layer cake pattern of sediments, and you see the portion of that sequence that's exposed in the Grand Canyon, and it continues northward and becomes something like 3 times thicker up in the Cedar Breaks area, in the Bryce Canyon area, and but at the base of it there is an erosional discontinuity. This rock, this crystal and rock basement, it's made of granite and schist, metamorphic rock, has been sheared off, and then you have a deposition of these layers, this orderly layer cake pattern. So that represents this great unconformity that's global in its extent and marks the onset of the flood. So let's look into the Grand Canyon. Once you start to recognize the layers in the Grand Canyon, you can stand at the rim. This is from the south rim, and track that great unconformity from one horizon to the other. Right at the base of this rather smooth, more gentle sloping area known as the Tonto Platform. It's the Bright Angel Shale, sort of greenish layer, and then just below that there's this cliff. That's the Tapete Sandstone, and at the very base of that sandstone, marked by these green arrows, is the great unconformity. So it's well exposed. That great unconformity is well exposed in the Grand Canyon. You can hike down to it. This was a hike I did with ICR in the late 1980s. John Morris here, son of Henry Morris, was shared a tent with him, and he is sitting right on that great unconformity there. In this case, it's sediment just below the great unconformity, the Precambrian layer known as the Hakatai Shale. And again, above the layer, you see these large boulders, these large cobbles just above the boundary. And other places in the canyon, you have even bigger pieces of rock. This one boulder here is about 15 feet in diameter and weighs 200 tons. And it just boggles the mind to imagine a water process able to rip up big blocks of rock like that, transport them along, and deposit them. So again, the same situation we saw in Wisconsin was prevailing here in Arizona at the time of the flood, the onset of the flood. Now, as I mentioned, just above this boundary, we have what is known as the Cambrian explosion of life. Representatives of 23 of the 27 animal phyla that are known from the entire fossil record are present in the sediment layers just above the great unconformity. And that sudden appearance of fossil life is commonly known as the Cambrian explosion, and the secular world has no explanation for it. It's a glaring refutation of the expectation of evolution, that you'd have such a sudden appearance of diverse, all these different body plans, different animal phyla present all together at the very beginning, and not this gradual development from simple to complex as Darwinism predicts.
John, during the creation part of my seminar, I made the huge point that there is no such thing as simple life form.
That's right.
You don't
These
see any simple life form in that Cambrian.
Right. There are vertebrates. Vertebrates have been found in the Cambrian strata. Fish, for example, so we have, and all the major phyla that we have today are represented in the Cambrian rocks. And the well-known trilobites, those are anything but simple. They had compound eyes with thousands of facets. You know, it was the nervous system to support those eyes, and it's as complex as modern organisms. So these were organisms as complex as we find today. Okay. Now, what about, we looked at the onset of the cataclysm. What about the end of the cataclysm? After so vast amount of sediment had been carried onto the continents, deposited in a horizontally extensive layers, a significant fraction of that sediment was then stripped away from the continent interiors, carried by runoff water to the continental shelves at the end of the flood. And so, again, showing this slide, I want to show how what's known as the Grand Staircase in Utah and Arizona, that south of this Grand Staircase, those sediment layers were once continuous. They continued several hundred miles at least to the south, and all that sediment has since been stripped away. And the fact that these canyons are so dramatic is strongly suggestive that that stripping away took place rapidly, very rapidly, at the end of the flood, at the runoff, during the runoff stage of the flood. And actually, the thickest sediment deposits on Earth are on the continental shelves and represent sediment that was stripped away during this runoff stage of the flood. And
you might point out, John, that the biblical text gives us a second 150 days of receding of the waters where all of this would have taken place.
That's right. That's right. So Bryce Canyon is an example. This is relatively high in that sediment record. Less time for those sediments to dewater and become cemented together, more vulnerable to erosion, and you see the delicate structures that remain after the runoff. So this is an example of what the terrain looks like as a result of that runoff, and because of the arid climate in this part of the U.S., that what the landscape looked like right after the flood is pretty well preserved. So this is what the landscape looked like immediately, shortly after the runoff. Very little additional erosion has occurred since that point. And there's strong testimony, in other words, to this catastrophic runoff after the flood in the record, if a person simply has the eyes to see it. So in summary, a staggering amount of geological change took place during this global cataclysm. And the Bible reveals that it all unfolded within the span of only a single year. So we have basically 150 days of prevailing of these waters, and then 150 days of receding of these waters, and then a few extra days for before Noah got off the ark, for the surface to dry up and for it to become safe for the inhabitants of the ark to get out on the surface. So what is the correct interpretation of the fossil record? Is it the record of some 580 million years of evolution, or is it tangible documentation of the destruction of life by the flood during a single year? Which is it? Well, I'm making the case that the evidence points very strongly to the second interpretation, that it's a result of God's judgment, result of this catastrophic flood that unfolded in only a few months' time in the day of Noah. So then a key issue with regard to the flood, physically, how could so much geological change occur in a time span of only a single year? What conceivably could have been the main causal mechanism? Well, the rest of my talk today and next week will focus on trying to answer that question. But some major clues to this answer come from the ocean bottom. A huge discovery of the 1960s was that all of today's oceanic crust is younger than much of the fossil-bearing sediment record on the continents. That was a big surprise to our scientists, that the ocean floors were young. And it basically precipitated a scientific revolution in the earth scientists, and ushered onto the stage the ideas of plate tectonics, that the earth's surface was mobile. Prior to the 1960s, most geologists thought that the present location of the continents, the present earth's surface, was ancient. Went back to the earliest times of the planet. But what with this discovery, and it mainly was enabled by the sonar technology developed during World War II to detect submarines. After the war, that technology was applied to exploring the ocean bottom, and this mid-ocean ridge system was discovered. And it was, as they tried to understand it, it was realized that there is spreading of the ocean floor along the crest of the ridge, and in other places the plunging into the Earth's interior of this surface layer of rock that became referred to as tectonic plates. We'll talk about that more in a moment. So all the ocean crust on Earth today has formed since the point marked by this blue arrow, right at the top of the Kaibab limestone at the rim of the Grand Canyon. It means that all of today's basaltic ocean crust has formed since the onset of the flood, and actually since this point in the flood. It's certainly since the onset of the flood. And so this implies that the opening of the entire Atlantic Ocean occurred during the flood, also that the continents migrated by thousands of miles during the flood only in a few months' time. So this 3,000 miles of width of the Atlantic Ocean, all of that igneous ocean crust that is below the sediment, just below the sediments in the Atlantic Ocean, all of that igneous rock had to have cooled from a molten state during the flood. And so that implies that there were some major tectonic changes that were unfolding during the flood. So what about the pre-flood ocean floor? Well, given the fact that we do not find even 1 square mile of it at the Earth's surface today, it means that it must have been recycled into the Earth's interior during the flood. The firm conclusion that rapid large-scale tectonic change must have been a fundamental aspect of the Genesis flood has come to be known as catastrophic plate tectonics. And this concept was first introduced in 1986 at the first International Conference on Creationism in Pittsburgh. Such large-scale tectonic change of the Earth's surface implies that the Earth's interior...
John, you're being humble there. You're the one that introduced it. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. I had that privilege. God gave me that privilege of first of all, giving me that understanding in 1978, and then allowing me to do a PhD at UCLA to work on that problem at a professional level, and then opening the door for me to actually work at Los Alamos, and they're giving me, as part of my contract offer, half time to work on my own research. And these secular guys had interviewed me and knew, very conscious of what my research agenda was, and knowing that, they made me the offer to allow me to work half time on my own research there. So it was, when they made me that offer, I immediately, the verse immediately came to mind about God turning the hearts of kings like streams of water. God somehow had to be working that way for them, these secular guys, to make me that kind of offer. And so it was, it's been quite an exciting adventure. And I was hired, and I started work there at Los Alamos early in '84, and by 1986, I had a presentation on catastrophic plate tectonics. So it was an extremely exciting experience. I give God the glory, and it continues. That excitement continues. Maybe at some point I can share the latest chapter in the development of these ideas. I'll talk more, some of the later chapters, next week. All right, but before we do that, let's look at, let's try to finish off today, look at some basics of Earth structure, so we're all on the same page. This is a cross section, a slice through the Earth, to give you a little bit of a feel of what the inside of the Earth is like. The two main parts of the Earth are the core, shown in dark blue here, which is mostly molten iron, and the mantle, which is mostly solid silicate rock, shown here in the lighter two blue colors. The uppermost part of the mantle is the thin, cold, mechanically rigid lithosphere, shown in white. It's also mantle. And this outer thin, mechanically rigid layer, about 60 miles in thickness, is broken into about a dozen large plates. And just below that rigid layer, below the plates, is a much weaker layer, shown in light blue here, known as the asthenosphere. Astheno means weak in Greek, and it's a layer, a weak layer, about 1,000 times weaker than the rock of the lithosphere. So it allows this top layer, this lithosphere, to slide with almost no resistance over the deeper parts of the Earth, and it makes plate tectonics possible. And so we see here, it shows the Atlantic Ocean, the plates moving apart from that ridge, horizontally apart. And then on the left-hand side of the image, in the Pacific Ocean, we see some of this lithosphere plunging back into the mantle. And that's to conserve area, so that to conserve generally every mile of new ocean crust that forms at a ridge, an equal amount is thrust back into the Earth's interior at what is known as a trench or a subduction zone. We'll talk more about this. So this gives you this intended to just give you a rough idea what the inside of the Earth is like. I want to emphasize that the mantle almost everywhere is solid, not liquid. It's a wide misconception that the mantle is liquid. is molten magma. But no, there's only small pockets of rock where there's melt. It just directly, immediately below a spreading ridge, there's commonly melt, and one of the processes associated with subduction is the production of melt. But apart from those two areas, those two regions, there's the rock is in the solid state, and it deforms plastically under stress, but the material is not liquid. It's solid. Okay. And this is sort of zooming in on a subduction zone where a slab of lithosphere is plunging back into the mantle down through the asthenosphere. And this is a situation where it's adjacent to some continental crust, a continent. A continent has a layer about on the order of 20 miles thick of granitic-like rock that's light and buoyant. It's shown here, labeled as continental crust. And as this subduction takes place, there's some water carried down in this plate that's plunging into the earth. Water lowers the melting temperature of rock, so there tends to be melting as this water comes out, is expelled at higher pressure, and so this produces melting, and blobs of melted rock come to the surface, and this is responsible for what is known as the Pacific Ring of Fire, where plates are subducting into the earth, and there's volcanism that's resulting, and so this is attempting to show what goes on. That there is a trench typically where the surface is pulled down of the overriding plate. That surface is pulled down, forming a trench, and also these plates typically are locked almost all the time. And but when the stresses get high enough, that sinking plate's sinking continuously, and the overriding plate is getting deformed as it's pulled down, the stresses between the plates is increasing, and eventually stresses get to the breaking point where the little unevenness, the little jags along the surface can no longer support the stress. They break, and there's a sudden slip. The overriding plate goes back to its original shape, and there's a slip, and there's an earthquake generated, and often a tsunami, sometimes a tsunami. So that's where the earthquakes, most of the world's earthquakes are generated, along at these subduction zones. All right, on the other kind of plate boundary, a spreading ridge where the seafloor spreading is taking place. This is where new ocean crust forms as the plates are moving apart. It's easy to measure a very high heat flow above these ridges, and these are zones where there is melting down beneath, and that the molten rock rises to the surface to fill in the gap, generating about up to about 3 or 4 miles thickness of basalt, a basaltic crust, a veneer of basalt on the ocean bottom, known as ocean crust. And so that's taking place in the world today. And this is where there are today what are called black smokers, vents that have hot water near the boiling point of water coming out of the earth along this mid-ocean ridge system. So these would correspond to another way of describing them. These are fountains on the ocean floor, fountains of the great deep that are currently existing on the ocean bottom today. Now,
could I ask a quick question?
Okay.
In your model, you don't see any kind of subterranean water source.
No, No, we'll talk. I'll talk about that. How long can I go today? Can I take another 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, you can take about 5 minutes. And just to answer the question, he hasn't gotten to the model yet. He's laying the groundwork to kind of give you the geology and the tectonic forces that he's going to then bring the model.
Okay, well, and that's okay. I was just looking at his pictures and stuff. I didn't see any subterranean water, and that's what I was asking.
He'll explain it all next week.
All right. The problem with a subterranean water chamber is that at high enough pressure, water actually penetrates into the crystalline lattice of the minerals and actually becomes part of the chemical makeup of the crystals. So you have hydrogen, you have oxygen ions and hydrogen ions as part of the mineral lattice. And so you hear some of the popular reports, you may have heard that there are several oceans worth of water in the mantle. What these reporters normally don't talk about is that water is actually inside the crystals of the rock and part of the crystals. So there is no liquid water, no free water, no free liquid water in the mantle because of the pressure and because of that there are minerals that host the oxygen and hydrogen quite nicely. And so if there's water there, it's part of the crystalline structure of the rocks and not free water. And so that's what geologists are referring to. That's what they understand about water in the mantle. And another thing is that if molten magma gets to the surface so easily, if you had a body of free water, say even just a few miles below the surface, there's an instability known as the Rayleigh-Taylor instability that would allow that water very rapidly to penetrate its way up to the surface and escape. So that is a gravitationally unstable state of affairs to have a large body of water inside the earth. And that's why those are just a few of the reasons why the ideas of Walt Brown simply are not defensible. I'm going to protest to Ray to remove that figure from Walt Brown's book from his presentation. It's simply not a viable, the whole idea is not viable. Anyway, maybe I hope that answers your question. Now, let me say also that I take these scriptures where it talks about lays up waters in storehouses. I believe those have significance, and I'm not. I guess I don't have a good explanation for what those words in the Hebrew text are alluding to. But I'm saying, as far as today's Earth is concerned, what we can detect from seismology, what we can understand doing experiments at high pressures with minerals, that there's almost certainly no large bodies of water inside the Earth today, and it's difficult to to understand how they might have been present earlier in Earth history. I don't totally dismiss it, but it's not easy to explain. And in the model that I'll be presenting next week, there seems to be no need for it to account for the flood. I hope that is at least, we can talk about it more next week after I present the model and I show just the incredible steam jets that are associated with catastrophic plate tectonics and how they produce heavy global rain as an aspect of catastrophic plate tectonics. And we'll look at the text, about the fountains of the great deep being broken up, what what that Hebrew text is likely referring to. So anyway, I think we're going to have to leave it at that for today, and we'll try to pick up and focus specifically on the mechanisms next week. I think this week was trying to lay a little more foundation on the evidence for the flood and give you a little better idea of what the inside of the earth is like, so that you can better understand the mechanism that I'm describing. And basically, it's very rapid subduction of the pre-flood ocean floor, pre-flood ocean crust into the earth. That crust is gravitationally unstable. It wants to sink, and there's a mechanism that allows it to sink catastrophically in a runaway manner. And the consequence is a rapid resurfacing of the whole planet in a few weeks' time. So I'll show you some computer models of all of that. And another aspect of it is that this rapid plate tectonics generates huge tsunamis, much bigger than are occurring today. And those tsunamis are able to erode huge amounts of sediment, transport it, and deposit it, and it appears able to produce the 6,000 feet of sediment on average during a few weeks' time during the flood. So it now appears that there's a mechanism capable of generating so much fossil-bearing sediment during a short period of time. So that's a little preview of what I hope to talk about next week. So thanks for your attention. We didn't have many questions, but maybe we can, if you think of some in the meantime, we can address them next week.
I'll close this in prayer. I want to thank you for the presentation, and let me close us in a prayer. Father, I do just give you praise and glory for all that you've done, all that you continue to do, all that you promise to do, Father. And we thank you that we are blessed to be a part of your plan, saved by the grace of your Son, our Lord and our Savior, Jesus Christ. Continue to bless these Friday gatherings. Continue to bless these men as they serve you, Father, on Sunday in preaching your truth. We thank you, Father, and we praise you. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.